Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast. Today's episode is an interview with Robert Williams, Director of Sustainable Procurement at AstraZeneca and Vice Chair of the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, PSCI. In both his roles at AstraZeneca and at the PSCI, Rob engages with stakeholders across the industry to make a real-world impact on ESG targets, finding collaborations and partnerships that help turn corporate sustainability goals into a reality. The PSCI are the sustainability partner to CDMO Live, and Rob will be hosting a roundtable at the event on the topic of sustainability and Scope 3 emissions. So don't miss it. You can register by going to cdmolive.com. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
The Pharma Source podcast is sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher Scientific provides industry-leading pharma services for drug development, clinical trial logistics, commercial manufacturing and clinical research. They partner with customers in the pharmaceutical, biotech and life sciences industries as their trusted CDMO to deliver medicine to patients faster.
On with the interview. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. Pleasure to have you on the podcast and really pleased that you can host PSCI's roundtable at CDMO Live as well.
Yeah, no, really looking forward to it. And thank you for the opportunity, Luke. Great to be talking to CDMO Live and looking to, again, just engage people in that conversation about how we drive decarbonisation and more broadly sustainability through the pharma value chain.
It's so important, isn't it? What I think would be a really interesting starting point, actually, Rob, is if we could just turn the clock back a bit to where your career began within energy procurement, I believe, before you got into pharma. Be interested to learn a bit more about how you got to where you are now, please.
Correct. Yeah, no, I've been in technical and commercial roles for the past 25 years and in procurement latterly. The energy procurement side started really is probably where sustainability started for many companies, in that using renewable electricity is one of the fastest ways to decarbonise still, but was one of the first opportunities. So prior to AstraZeneca, I was working in the telecom sector, large energy users, electricity users in particular, head of procurement there for the energy and infrastructure section of that telecoms company. And so buying renewable electricity was a key part of how that company was decarbonising. Buying renewable electricity at that time was quite technically challenging, market capacity limitations. But as you buy renewable electricity, we were engaging increasingly with the sustainability team within the company and with customers and with suppliers on what were they doing the same. It's almost before sustainable procurement became a thing, we were working on sustainable procurement. So we're looking at how we could support other companies to buy renewable electricity equally to cut their carbon emissions before, if you like, the conversation about Scope 3 became so powerful. But yeah, it was a really good intro, and then transitioning over the last number of years into AstraZeneca to lead in a sustainable procurement role there, where really bringing that expertise and insight, but across all of the categories of procurement. So I sit in the central team of procurement in AstraZeneca, supporting all of the category managers across API purchasing, excipient purchasing, but all the indirect space as well to help the supply chain and support the supply chain to decarbonise.
It's a really interesting emerging role, isn't it? Sustainable procurement. I'd be quite interested to understand how that actually works in practice. So how do you bridge the group's sustainability goals and make it actually where the pedal hits the metal, if that's the right expression? How do you actually make big sustainability goals tangible for procurement teams? How does it work?
Yeah, I think tangible is the right word there, Luke. I think translating it from group sustainability into procurement, and then from procurement into contracts, into policies that suppliers then have in real black and white language, because they become expectations again, which people want to perform, should deliver. So that's where the pedal hits the metal, the rubber hits the road, whichever phrase you want to use. Group sustainability will, and in any organisation, in any sector, will undertake a materiality assessment. They will look at what's positive that the company can implement on, what the negative impacts that the company could have, and how to manage those. The kind of the double materiality assessment as it's becoming framed. Taking those then, so AstraZeneca framed those across healthy planet, healthy society, and healthy people, because it's not just about environment. Sustainability is really importantly about people, about patients for AstraZeneca, but about society. It's about ethics. It's about inclusion and diversity. It's about decent work and safe and healthy working places, as well as reducing carbon emissions and managing pollution in the operations and the use of natural resources in the things we do. But how do we translate the language, first of all? How do you take the learnings from group sustainability into procurement and bring it into procurement language?
And how do you do that?
No, how do you do that, Luke, is a great question. I think the place where many people start is setting out that expectations of third parties or the supplier code of conduct. What do we do? But thinking about, first of all, the team within procurement, ESG is not a new concept. Environmental social governance is not a new concept. But for procurement, it is still newer on the spectrum. Now, remembering that procurement has dealt with and continues to deal with new and emerging challenges over the years. So whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's data privacy, this is the latest of a series of new and emerging issues which companies have to manage through their supply chain, and therefore procurement becomes the focal point for that engagement between the company and the suppliers, together with, of course, the wide range of business stakeholders who work with those companies. How do you translate it? It's got to be very black and white, very prescriptive. Procurement work well when things are contractually expressed in black and white, unambiguous language. That works well with procurement and works well clearly with suppliers who need to understand expressly what their obligations are to deliver against, what the expectations of the company are, and indeed where the opportunities of partnering on these emerging issues as well. So translating it requires clarity. It requires simplicity. It is a complex area. It's got to be made not complicated in its translation from sustainability into procurement. But essentially, it takes it from that strategic language of group sustainability into the tangible contractual language of procurement. And that then is how we can work with suppliers clearly and simply and consistently over a long period of time to deliver on what are long-term sustainability goals for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals out to 2030, for net zero goals out to 2050.
And AstraZeneca recently won Best Supply Chain Engagement Award, which I think was to do with your use of the EcoVadis system, I believe.
Correct.
Interesting to understand a bit more about what's made you so successful in engaging the wider supply chain.
EcoVadis is one of the tools that we use to engage with our suppliers because it's a leading, respected third-party system. Importantly, it's not an AstraZeneca system. So our suppliers who take the time, get the benefit from entering their information into EcoVadis and get an ESG rating or ranking or scoring from EcoVadis, can equally use that with other pharma companies. Many companies in the pharma sector use EcoVadis, equally other sectors as well use EcoVadis to assess risk or assess sustainable maturity of their suppliers. And the scoring is robust and provides great indication for suppliers about how they benchmark against their peers, but also highlights to us as the customer, highlights where there's opportunities for improvement. And that, by the way, is how we use it. We use it as opportunities for improvement rather than the flip side of that. So we use EcoVadis as a tool to drive that and support that engagement. It's within that system is a significant amount of capability building through the EcoVadis Academy. So we've rolled it out on scale. We've now got over 2,000 of our suppliers. Over 60% of our spend is now rated by EcoVadis, and that provides us great insights into the strengths and weaknesses of particular groups of suppliers, particularly categories of suppliers, but helps us really support our suppliers to develop their maturity as we want to move forward towards those 2030 and 2050 goals. So EcoVadis is just one mechanism. We also use the CDP supply chain program to deep dive on carbon, which is really essential, obviously, for tackling Scope 3. And we ask our suppliers to sign up to science-based targets and also, importantly, tell us about some of the social aspects, the inclusion and diversity, and how that's respected within their organization.
Just listening to you talking there, Rob, there's obviously clearly lots of different initiatives, lots of different targets. And I'm sure that thinking again about the category managers who are having to implement a lot of this, it won't just be sustainability objectives they have. They'll also have inflationary cost pressures to manage, as well as everything else on their plates. How do you avoid the risk of cognitive overload and bombarding all these busy procurement people with so many different goals? What's the best way, in your experience, to cut through that?
I think it's important that GCMs have global category managers, procurement people who are dealing with suppliers and categories of spend on a day-to-day basis. They have the information at hand, and that's what we've sought to do as we built the program within AstraZeneca and built some central resource through my team, is to manage that interaction with suppliers, to get companies engaged in these targets, these goals, these requirements we have. But the administration is done through my team. The goal setting, the targeting, the procurement strategy is done through my team. And the results are provided to the category managers, to the procurement leads, who are then set to negotiate So the GCMs, the procurement managers, are not expected or needed to be SME, subject matter experts in the topic, but clearly they want to be competent, they want to be comfortable, and they want to understand where the challenges are, whether that's human rights in certain high risk categories or whether it's environmental in others. They want to understand what are the levers that they can pull to decarbonize or to reduce human rights risks in their category of spend in their supply chain that they're managing. So it's keeping the communication simple, but it's managing some aspects centrally to provide information which is then useful for the category managers to take forward.
Thank you. As an industry, so much of biopharma's emissions are within that scope 3 category. It's clearly not just the efforts of any one company is going to solve this. The role of collaboration across the industry is incredibly important, which I guess brings us to your role as vice chair of PSCI. It'd be interesting to understand what collaboration within these kind of forums can actually achieve if the industry works together.
So PSCI is the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, has 81 members. And over 1,000 registered suppliers in that direct material space, in the CDMO and beyond space. Its combined turnover of those members is about 1.3 trillion, so represents a significant chunk of the pharmaceutical sector globally. The collaboration within there started around the joint audit program. Ultimately, the joint audit and the audit of supplier sites on EH&S and on other topics, human rights and labour, is essential to prove what the corporate goals are set to achieve. Are they translating to action and to practical insights that we can evidence on the ground? And so the initiation of PSCI was around that joint audit program, saving time and effort for both suppliers in the sector and for the organizations requesting those. But it's important that then the learnings from those audits are built into capability building. And that's really the second pillar of what PSCI deliver, is around that capability build. And so there's a lot of time spent by expert SME topic teams, such as the decarbonisation team that I work closely with, but also the human rights and labour team, the pharmaceuticals and the environment team and others, taking those and creating those lessons and learning plans for suppliers, really to set out common expectations. And coming back to your theme of collaboration, that's what's really helpful for suppliers across the industry, is to know that all of their customers, ideally all of their customers, are working together and have aligned expectations. So if one company, if AstraZeneca, has expectations which are very different to some other pharma companies, that can make it more difficult for suppliers to all of those companies to really align and invest in change to meet those global requirements, remembering that there are local standards quite different while we want to set global ways of working. So really looking at that collaboration at a practical sense allows the industry to move forward faster. We have aligned standards, suppliers know where they stand, they can come to PSCI and find out about those, and then actually look at where they are on a maturity matrix, take learnings to help them improve, and then meet the expectations of a group of customers. So that's really the collaboration in a practical sense. Getting those same aligned standards really helps the industry. Building responsible supply chains is the theme of PSCI, and that's how we do it collectively to help everyone move faster.
Yeah. How aligned is the industry, would you say?
It's a great question. I think there's always leaders and followers. There's always people who are slightly ahead in one area and slightly behind in another. But it's important that the majority are aligned and the majority kind of equally can see the expectations of, as a whole, where the sector wants to be, where the sector needs to be in many senses. It's a heavily regulated industry. Quality is absolutely paramount. Patient safety is absolutely paramount. And so those things automatically bring alignment, but alignment on a broader range of sustainability topics can be obtained through the likes of PSCI in order to drive the sector forward towards what are expectations of the pharma sector beyond from stakeholders outside of the sector that look at us to present leadership in the space.
We've recently shared your report, PSCI's latest materiality assessment, which I think is a very interesting, very visual way to look at the different issues broadly within the whole sustainability category. And there are so many, aren't there? I think a lot of the time people just think sustainability equals decarbonisation, but some of the biggest issues that you were presenting in that report, when ranked by both financial and planetary impact, including areas like anti-bribery, pharmaceuticals in the environment, decarbonisation, climate resilience, biosafety, responsible lobbying. It's a broad church, isn't it, of all sorts of different issues. Two questions from that for me is, one, is there a risk sometimes of it being so broad, it's trying to cover so much. And the other is, within all of those different areas, which bits are we making the most headway in, which bits need to be prioritized?
I think back to your question about the broad church. I think if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that were framed many years ago, the 17 goals that are there, including the Partnership for the Goals, importantly, they cover a very broad range of issues. That's the start point for many people's materiality assessment because of the gravitas that framework has. But as you rightly say, it covers ethics, it covers gender equality, it covers anti-corruption and bribery, it covers institutions and climate action and a whole range of topics, because we need all of those things to advance. We need all of those things to be protected. We need all of those things on a planet with an ever-growing population to be thought about, to be considered in the actions of every company. And so I guess translating the UN SDGs to that materiality assessment, it's not a copy, but it has a lot of similarity, that it is addressing a broad range of topics which need to be thought about and considered and addressed in order that we maintain to use the AstraZeneca phrase, a healthy planet, a healthy society, and as well as healthy people within that as well.
Are there any particular issues which you feel as though we haven't been doing enough on as an industry that need more focus than others?
I'm going to turn that around and talk about where I think we're leaders, if I may, but I think there are always areas where we can improve. There are always areas where we are now looking to improve through embedding sustainability goals for the industry to move forward. I think, the fact that there was a World Health Day at COP in Dubai last year shows that connection between health and climate. And, are we doing enough on that? Genuinely, I think there is much, much more to do. It's very, very challenging as we go beyond our tier 1 suppliers to tier 2, tier 3, and right back to the raw materials or the starting materials that we use. And that's just in the direct material space. There is more that can be done in that space as we reach out globally across all geographies, all countries, with equally their own legal and regulatory frameworks within those countries. Is there more that can be done? Absolutely. But I think that's quite generic, but I think that's also common in all industries, that as large multinational corporations look down their supply chain, we will find challenges, we will find opportunities for improvement. And I think we've got to look at them like that, because as we focus more on sustainability, there's opportunities there for companies, whether they're members of PSCI or whether they're deep in the supply chain, to really demonstrate leadership and be the leading companies, the growth companies of the future as well. So undoubtedly there's areas where we need to do more. Climate action is undoubtedly one of those. Let's not forget, healthcare is responsible for 5% of global emissions, which is more than aviation. So absolutely, there is more we can do in that space, and other topics besides.
Thank you. On collaboration, how does PSCI work with other groups? Manufacturing 2030, for example, I know that's another organisation that you're involved with. How does that tend to work, and what's the role, I suppose, of these wider collaborative efforts?
It's a great point about there's many collaborations that are developed, and I think pharmaceuticals industry is recognised as collaborating strongly on sustainability. We recognise that. Perhaps it's because we recognise that connection between human health and climate change and the impacts that climate change is causing on human health. Whatever it is, we are recognised, I think, as a sector as leading in collaborative activity. Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative has been around for over 10 years now. Energize, to pick another pharmaceutical collaboration, has been around for just over 3 years, or coming up to 3 years now. That involves now 20 pharmaceutical companies, leading pharmaceutical companies. That's a collaboration about helping suppliers use renewable electricity. What we did within PSCI was look to actually bring those together. Those companies, the majority of whom are members of PSCI, it's in all of our best interests to bring these collaborations together to try and expand the reach of things like Energize with more members of PSCI. So we're addressing the same suppliers. That, there's some great stats that CDP shared in various meetings, that if you can get one company asking for a supplier to report into CDP, then maybe it's only 50 or 60% of the time they'll respond. But when 3-4 more companies ask the same supplier to respond, 95% or more of the time they will respond. So that kind of collaborative leverage That's really important to get supply chains to act together. So the importance of collaboration is there. The need for collaboration is well understood. And I think bringing together things like Energize and PSCI is starting to bear fruit, that we're growing the reach of that. We need all of the pharmaceutical sector to use renewable electricity. By 2030, there's another initiative, the Sustainable Markets Initiative, and the Health Systems Task Force underneath that, which happens to be led by our CEO, Pascal Soriot, that also has set joint targets. We talked earlier about how those aligned goals for supply chains can really help people move faster, helps companies move faster. That's activating and really driving for increased uptake of renewable electricity by 2030. That's one of the actions we can see. Again, the reason for that, and kind of referring forward to the CDMO Live event, is what are the strategies for reducing carbon and scope 3 emissions, is about that use of electricity, renewable electricity, the use of clean heat, looking at solvents. They're three really strong topics for CDMOs in particular to be tackling over the next few years to decarbonize rapidly by 2030 on a route to net zero before 2050.
What would you say your main priorities are likely to be for the next 12 to 18 months or so? If you could pick out just like, one or two initiatives you're going to be focused on, what would they be?
I think on the environmental side, and I'll focus on the environmental side here, as you say, it's a broad church of sustainability that we are looking at. But on the environmental side, it's hitting those key levers for decarbonisation. Every organisation, every company, whether it's direct supply chain or indirect supply chain, uses electricity. So the conversion to renewable electricity to decarbonise our supply chain is essential. That's a really key priority. The second key priority is around heat, clean heat. And you mentioned Manufacture 2030. There's an emerging work with M2030 there with suppliers in the pharmaceutical supply chain as part of the Activate program that a number of us again collaborated on with M2030 to really look at how we can support suppliers to switch away from using fossil gas to using other sources of heat, heat being essential in many of the processes that create the life-changing medicines we make.
Thank you. Very interesting. Finally, Rob, just to wrap it up, I wonder what advice you could share with others. Take someone who's working in an external manufacturing or a procurement role. There they're trying to renegotiate contract with a supplier, something like that. What advice would you give so they can make a true impact?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of information out there that can direct us to, again, I'll focus on the decarbonisation aspect, if I may, is we know what the levers are. It's implying those specific levers, and I think it's being precise, being targeted. As you just asked me, what are the two key things? It's focusing on those two or three key things, because otherwise the action can get diluted. Now, that's not to say that we mustn't also think about human rights and other aspects in the supply chain, and those are hugely important and must be looked at as well. But again, just to focus on decarbonisation, looking at one or two key levers that can be applied. The change cycles in this take some years. So really focusing on key metrics that are really measurable, tangible, and practical, and that can be done now. That's the key thing, done now. So I think in terms of taking action, those are the key things. Frame them clearly, unambiguously, long-term targets, but partner. We say we cannot do this alone. 97% of AstraZeneca's emissions are in the supply chain. Across PSCI member companies are likely to be in that 80% plus in their supply chain. So PSCI members rely on their supply chain to decarbonise in order to deliver on their own decarbonisation goals. We cannot do this alone. So partnership ultimately is essential, and approaching those negotiations, those contracts with a partnership mindset is important. But we do need to work with suppliers who are well engaged. And there's many, many of those across the globe. It's been really great to see some of the progress that we've already made with many of those partners. And in fact, 12% of all of the companies who are on the SBTI registry are AstraZeneca suppliers. And over 60% of our spend is now with suppliers who have committed to or more on SBTI. So we're making some great progress, still more to do. But that's because of the partnership approach that we and many other PSCI members are taking.
How does it feel, Rob, purely on a personal level, to be involved with something that's clearly making a positive impact on the world? I mean, do you get a sense of satisfaction from that?
I think purpose is always something that people are looking for from their role in an organization. They're looking for a purpose-driven organization to work for. I think it's thrilling to be part of a journey to decarbonise by 2030 and towards net zero by 2045, and also look at those other sustainability goals to deliver on that, as AstraZeneca would frame it, a healthy planet, a healthy society and healthy people. So it's I think you've got to maintain a level of passion within sustainability, because there are barriers there. It helps overcome a lot of challenges that are there, whether it's the work volume, the technicality, or the new opportunities that have to be waited for, have to be driven for as well. So yeah, it's a great to be part of driving change throughout the industry.
Fantastic. Well, fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Rob. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Luke.
Thank you to Rob and to the PSCI for that fascinating overview. As mentioned, Rob will be hosting a roundtable at CDMO Live on the 13th of June on the topic of sustainability and Scope 3 emissions. Register today for your free ticket by heading to cdmolive.com. Thank you for listening.